examples from section 1.4. First one says translate into mathematical symbols. And the first one on here says x is at most 5. So you got to think about what that means. It means x, the most x can be is 5. That means it can be 5. It can be things less than 5. So that means x is less than or equal to 5. Next one says negative 2 plus g is at least 4. So if I say something is at least 4, that means it could be 4, could be 5, 6, 7. So that means it's greater than or equal to 4. So I have negative 2 plus g is greater than or equal to 4. The next one says translate into an English sentence. This is a little bit tough, but I'm just going to do it as simply as I can. Some number multiplied by 6 then added to 52 is greater than or equal to negative 1. Now we're going to solve an inequality and graph it on a number line and write the solution in interval notation. So this one's going to be a little longer. So when you're solving an inequality, remember that you're mostly doing it like you would solve an equation, but the exception is when you multiply or divide by a negative number, and we'll get to that in this one. So I'm going to start out just like it's an equation, but I'm not going to write it as an equation. I'm going to keep that greater than sign that's in there. So I'm recommending to you all that you always collect the variables on the left, especially on an inequality, because I find that when people collect it on the right, they tend to misinterpret the inequality. They solve it correctly, but they misinterpret it, so they graph it incorrectly and they do the interval notation incorrectly. So I'm going to collect my variables on the left. That means I'm going to subtract 9x on both sides. Now remember, this is a subtraction, so we don't have to do anything with flipping the inequality sign. That comes only when we multiply or divide by a negative number. So 5x minus 9x is negative 4x. So we got the minus 6 greater than 2. Now I'm going to add 6 to both sides. So my new inequality is minus 4x is greater than 8. Now we're going to divide both sides by negative 4. When I divide both sides by a negative number, I'm going to take that symbol and flip it around. So then I get x is less than negative 2. So be sure you remember that little trick. You're multiplying or dividing both sides by a negative number. Okay, the next thing we were asked to do is to graph this. So that means we're going to draw ourselves a number line. I always like to have 0 in there as a reference. Negative 2 is our boundary point where we need to draw our symbol, so I'm going to make sure I have negative 2 in there. And then, now it says x is less than negative 2, so that means I'm going to draw the open parentheses, and then I'm going to shade to the left, pointing toward the negative, because our inequality says that x is less than negative 2. So now when you do the interval notation, the trick that I like to use is look at the graph, and your interval notation should look like that graph. So that means my interval notation has the open parentheses, the -2, and then we're shading toward -infinity, so it goes like this, and whenever we have infinity in there, we use an open parentheses. The other thing to think about is that when you do the interval notation, you always have the smallest number, in other words, in this case, the most negative number on the left, and then the bigger number on the right. So in other words, inside the interval notation, the numbers are in the same order that they would be on the number